I'm Glenn Campbell. I call myself a demographic philosopher. I'm looking at life and trying to predict the future through the lens of demography, or the study of human populations. And in this episode, I'm going to take a first stab at the really big question of why don't people want babies anymore? Why aren't people having babies like they used to? And I'm going to try to reduce this to the simplest terms. People don't want babies because babies don't make economic sense. In the modern world, babies are extraordinarily expensive in many different ways, expensive in money, expensive in lost opportunities and lost freedom, expensive in the huge risk you incur when you decide to have a baby. And any sensible creature who is capable of thinking ahead is going to say, this is just too expensive for me. This is just too costly, and I'm getting very little benefit out of it. If we look at children as an investment, well, it's a very poor investment, at least in practical terms. You're devoting a huge portion of your resources in your life to these creatures, and you're not getting any practical benefit in the end. It used to be that children did provide a practical benefit. For example, if you lived on a farm and you had a lot of children were your farm hands. They provided your free labor to run your farm, and your farm could actually get richer if you had a lot of children. Children also provided your retirement plan. Back before there were state pension systems, children were your retirement plan. If you had a lot of kids, you knew that your kids would take care of you when you got old and frail. And that's no longer the case. Neither of those things are the case anymore. We're not allowed to work children in the fields. We can't work them in the factories anymore. And children aren't expected to care for their parents in their old age because we've got institutional systems to do that. We've got things like Social Security and pension systems to take care of people in their old age. So what happens after you have children is your children just go off and do their thing, and that's the end of it. So you've made this huge investment, and you get no practical return from it. You may get some emotional satisfaction of having perpetuated some of yourself into the next generation, but there's no practical benefit in having children, and absolutely stunning costs. I look at this from a personal level. I love children. I like playing with children. I like seeing them develop. But I can't afford it. I also have the problem of not having a womb to bear a child in, but even if I had a womb, I would think long and hard about doing this because it's so damn expensive. And my desires to have children, desires to raise children are weighed against all the desires I have to do many other things. And I realize that this is just not a good idea for me. And I think this is the same thing that everyone is thinking. Well, I'd like to have children. I'd like to carry on my traditions, but the cost is so high, and there are so many other things I could be doing with my time and money. I also face the reality that I don't think I have the resources to raise children well, that this would kind of be inhumane to bring a child into a situation where I can barely take care of myself, that I'm in a society that I don't have complete confidence in. And why would I want to bring someone into a situation that could be bad for them? There's the question of whether it is moral for me to bring a child into the world when I don't have perfect circumstances for that child. So I may say, yes, I'd like to have children, but not right now. I need to get more stable in my career. I got to make sure I have the financial resources to properly care for that child. And I have to make sure the place that I'm living is healthy enough for children so that I don't traumatize that child. And everything, I have to have all my ducks in a row before I'm ready to have children. And in reality, that means you might never have all your ducks in a row. You might never achieve that level of stability where you feel that you can provide a good home for a child. Now, this is completely different from other animals. And other animals have this reproductive imperative, this biological imperative to reproduce. So every other animal will reproduce to its maximum capability. And it is assumed that we, because we are animals, also have this reproductive drive. And this isn't exactly correct. What we have instead is certain impulses that evolution has programmed into us. And these impulses in the past have assured that children will come out of it. But we found ways to thwart these impulses so they are no longer effective. And the main impulse that is programmed into our brain is sexual attraction. We are drawn to members of the opposite sex, and we're drawn to have sex with them. And traditionally, having sex meant having children. We also have a bonding mechanism. We're not just attracted to the opposite sex. We want to bond with the opposite sex. We want to form a lifetime a relationship with another person. And this is similar to pair bonding in the animal world. Certain animals will bond for life in order to be able to raise children. And this is essential for humans because human children require such a long childhood and so much resources compared to other animals that you want parents to be firmly bonded to each other. So nature has programmed these things into our brains, into the most primitive parts of our brains. So we're drawn to be sexually attracted to other people, and we are also drawn to bond with them. The bonding process is called falling in love, where your nervous system kind of reaches out to another person and it makes that other person part of you, so that if you're separated from that other person, you feel anxiety and you want to get back together with them. That is the bonding process that is deep within our brain stem. We also have the desire to take care of small creatures. Babies kind of manipulate us. We look into the eyes of a baby and the baby smiles, and boy, that's like cocaine to us. We really want to interact with that baby or that small creature. So in the modern world, we've come up with all sorts of ways to thwart these impulses. We've come up with birth control, which means that we can now have sex and enjoy the pleasures of sex without making babies. And we can bond with another person without babies coming out of it. So people exercise these impulses by falling in love, by having sex, with bonding with this other person and living with this other person and not having babies. So the only impulse that isn't solved there is this desire to take care of small creatures. And how do we solve that? Well, we invented something called pets, like dogs and cats. So what happens now is people fall in love, they have sex, they bond with each other, they move in together, and they get a dog. And the dog provides all of those that satisfaction of taking care of a small creature. So people don't need babies anymore. We've thwarted all of nature's tricks for making babies, and all we're left with is reason. So now we have babies only because we have thought things through and have reasons to do it. And this is much less reliable than the old mechanisms that nature had for us. We may decide that having a baby is a good idea, that this is a project we'd like to engage in for emotional reasons. We want to have experience the joy of parenthood. And so many people will still have babies to try to experience that joy, to try to find some emotional satisfaction in life. And it works. I mean, if nothing else, having a baby will certainly give your life direction for the next 20 years. And it can be very satisfying and very rewarding. But you don't want to do a lot of it. Once you've experienced the joy of parenthood, you don't want to repeat it very often because you also realize how much work it is. So you might have one or two kids and stop. And that's how people have kids today. They're not having these huge families that they once had. Probably throughout most of history, a woman would have on average 9 children. If she lived long enough, she'd have as many children as she could have, let's say a child every 2 years. And that's simply not the way we're going to do things today because we realize just how expensive children are. Even if you enjoy the pleasures of parenthood, you're going to stop after 2 or maybe 3 kids. And if parents who do have children are stopping at 2 kids and you have a whole lot of people who aren't having children, well, that's just not enough children to sustain your society. And you compare the people who have had children with the people who don't have children. The people who don't have children have a much better life because, they can travel, they can do whatever they want, they can travel overseas, they've got a lot more money to spend on themselves. And the people who have had the children are economically, they're the losers because they've had to spend so much money on their children. So when you choose your lifestyle, when you're a teenager and you decide which lifestyle to choose, do you want to travel the world and accomplish great things in your career and do all sorts of exciting things, or do you want to have children and the exciting things tend to win? If nothing else, you want to put off having children because you just don't have enough money. You don't have enough money, so you put off having children. You pursue a career and you say, well, I'll have children later when my life is actually stabilized. So instead of having children as teenagers, as people used to do, now people are having children in their 30s and even their 40s. And if they take that route, then women just don't have enough fertility in them, enough childbearing years to have more than 1 or 2 kids. So all of this adds up to a dire situation. On the whole, you have people not having enough babies to sustain a society. And from a society standpoint, you really need to replace the members of your society in every generation. If you don't do that, then a lot of bad things happen. You have society getting older, population aging, so you have a ton of old people and not very many workers supporting those old people, and that's devastating for society. It also means that your economy can't grow. Your economy over time is going to shrink if your population shrinks. So this is bad for society to not have children, but society is expecting individual couples and individual people to provide those children. It's expecting these people to invest in society at their own expense. And this system just isn't working. It's never going to work. Governments can offer all sorts of incentives. They can offer free child care, and they can offer free parental leave, and they can give people tax breaks. And that will not convince people to have children because the economics are still horrible for having children. For society, every child is a future taxpayer. So every child that's born today is eventually going to pay taxes to the state. So it's kind of like planting a tree. You plant a tree today, knowing that 20 years from now you can harvest that tree and make some money. But what we're doing today is expecting someone else to plant that tree so that a third party can harvest it. It's like you plant a tree, you raise it to maturity, you prune it and raise it to maturity, and then someone else comes along and cuts down that tree and takes the wood. That's the situation today, that society is going to harvest the wood of these children, and but someone else is expected to plant the tree. And the planters of the tree are rebelling. They're saying, no, I'm not going to do this for someone else's benefit. And it's really hard to dissuade people of that. It's really hard to pay people enough to justify them planting the tree that society is going to eventually harvest. And governments are in such dire straits now because the demographics are already bad. We already have an excess of old people. That governments just don't have the money to pay people to have the babies that will eventually become the taxpayers of the future. So it's a desperate and unsolvable system. And this is only going to get worse in the countries of the world. If South Korea has a fertility rate of 1 baby per woman right now, that's only going to drop over time because as society deteriorates in South Korea, people are going to look hard at their situation and they're going to say, maybe I want a baby, but not right now because the economy is doing so badly. It would be inhumane to bring someone a new life into this terrible society. So South Korea's birth rate can only plummet, and that's really true of all the countries of the world. Things can only go down. So by any conventional measure, things are screwed. We are screwed. Economies are going to collapse. Things are going to get really bad. And the only solution that I see in the long run is that we have to restructure ourselves in some way to somehow make these babies. And that's what I'm doing in other parts of this project. How can we organize ourselves in such a way to make baby making profitable, make it work for people? My essential solution is that parents have to get together and raise children in some sort of communal fashion. That raising children makes no sense for two parents, but it might make more sense for like 10 parents or 20 parents who get together and decide to raise children together. So I will talk about that in other podcasts. For now, I just want to let you know that things are hopeless. There really is no way to bring up the birth rate around the world. Because it makes no sense for people. People don't have the incentive to have children. Why should I devote a huge portion of my life to something that's not going to benefit me? It's only going to benefit someone else.